Welcome back to another Box Score Geeks show. Brian, this is so weird because we're starting to regularly do this again, but then it feels like history is just repeating itself. So I'm very confused. So I'm your host, Trey Alvarez, found most places as Nerd Numbers. With me, as always, my producer, voice of God, Brian Foster. And today we're going to be talking the Dallas Mavericks. Dean Oliver doing what Dean Oliver has done for 20 years. At least there's a constant, Brian. The Lakers and Golden State doing what we know they are always capable of doing. The Knicks being good, Brian. I can't deal with this. And revisiting an article idea, Brian, that you inadvertently pitched last show. I didn't get around to writing, so at bare minimum, I want to talk the article I would have written on this show, and maybe that'll give me incentive to write it, or at least have our dulcet tones do some variant of a rough draft for the listeners who have been deprived of an article inspired by Brian. Brian, how's it going?
I'm going great. Like you said, it's deja vu all over again. We're here in March now. We're at the playoff stretch. We are past the All-Star game. We're past the trade deadline. Teams are finalizing up their 10-day contracts and converting those. The buyout market is about to hit, and yeah, we're in the stretch run, and teams are gonna be fighting for playoff spots. And in the West, especially, holy cow, is it packed tight? All these teams have the same record, except for a few outliers at the top. And this is as good as it gets, Trey. I love the NBA so much. I've been watching so many games this week. I love it.
So, Brian, actually, the one downside of bi-weekly is sometimes like topics fall right in the right range for us to forget or miss them. And there are two wild ones related to Victor Wembanyama I want to get out there. We briefly touched the All-Star game and it wasn't either of our bag. You watched it though. I'll give you that respect. I didn't really.
All
I
three
saw
days. I watched
highlights.
all 3 days.
The one thing I'm remiss we didn't discuss is that Victor Wembanyama and Chris Paul attempted to cheat in it and got DQ'd, which I love that, man. If the follow-up, so the two bookends to Victor Wembanyama, one hilarious, one a bummer, is one, he cheated with Chris Paul, did a heel turn in the middle of the All-Star game. I loved it. And it was so hilarious to be on Twitter being like, Chris Paul and Victor Wembanyama should be ashamed. And I was like, this is such pro wrestling. I love this. Flip side though, I mess up the term always, but it's like essentially a blood clot, a really bad blood clot, and there's a specific term like DVT or something like
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
artery.
Deep vein thrombosis is DVT. What a
Thank you.
lot it
Oh, I
causes a
actually
lot of
got
the
the.
time is a pulmonary embolism. Is related to a blood clot as well.
So I have no idea on this. I'm not even sure if it's the same because I know that Chris Bosch's where I believe in his lungs, but it's pretty serious from the sounds of it, and I don't know the long-term implication of like if Victor Wembanyama can ever play again. I don't even know that. I know he's out for the season. Additionally, I know Greg Popovich had like a stroke and is out too. So just a lot of roughness in San Antonio, which really bums me out because one, I loved that heel turn. Like I said, Chris Paul and Victor Wembanyama being the villains at the All-Star game. We kind of mentioned that De'Aaron Fox was not an optimal move, but it was the right type of move for a team on the upswing like the Spurs to do. And if we were looking at last season, this season seemed to be going the same way, which is Victor Wembanyama still seems like he's getting NBA ready, which means like last season as a rookie, it took him a while to ramp up. And then basically after the All-Star game was a star. And this season, same kind of thing. Started slow, but was kind of coming around and still looking good. So, it's rough because it feels like speaking ill of the dead, but the conversation happened in front of it. I was talking with Dave Barry about Victor Wembanyama's production, and there are two really important facets. Sorry to have thrown a Victor Wembanyama audible at you, Brian, but it works. The first was he was like, Victor Wembanyama is no David Robinson or Tim Duncan, which is fair. But I did this, Brian. I looked at Victor Wembanyama's raw productivity this season. And if you go back to, I want to say 94 for David Robinson, their productivity raw is the same. The difference is David Robinson compared to his peers in 1994 was much further ahead than Victor Wembanyama is to his peers now. And that's been a thing I brought up about the NBA forever that makes it so hard to judge is that If you use outdated metric practices, Brian, I may be teeing up something for the future, you really have to anchor it in where you are at because sports is zero sum. It is not enough to be good at the sport. You have to be better than your competitors. And so we have like, if you dropped Victor Wembanyama in 1994, he would destroy the NBA and win MVP over David Robinson. But he's playing in the modern NBA against Karl Anthony Towns and Nikola Jokic and Luka Doncic. And somehow LeBron James is the one constant. LeBron James, the only thing that didn't change in basketball, but everything else does. So that was that. And then I also brought up that David Robinson and Tim Duncan were both 4 year seniors at their college. And David Robinson, I believe, also had to serve 1 or 2 years in the Navy before he came into the NBA. Got him the coolest nickname, though, by the way, right? Like Admiral. And it's also such a cheat code, right? He goes into the Navy for like 1 or 2 years, and he basically gets promoted to the Admiral as a nickname. So it's like David Robinson played it perfectly both ways, right? Like, quickest way to get to be the Admiral is you become an MVP in the NBA, you get to jump a few years. So I was noting, I was like, Victor Wembanyama's been in the NBA 2 years. I'm like, we have no idea what he is going to look like if he can play again, or was going to look like if he can't in 3 or 4 years. So it was kind of funny doing the like comparing David Robinson, where we would say, oh, Victor Wembanyama is an average NBA player. He's no David Robinson. And the funny thing is it's like actually 3 years younger than when David Robinson ever set foot on the NBA. Victor Wembanyama is playing like David Robinson, but the game has just gotten harder in part because of players like David Robinson.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. The age is the biggest thing by far. If you look deeper into Wembanyama's stats, he already looked like so. Although what a lot of people were saying was he's going to be Defensive Player of the Year this year, just based on his shot blocking and his numbers. Right? He obviously can't get that now, but yeah, his defensive numbers are crazy good. And if he was having a normal kind of development track, and what I mean by that is just run the pick and roll, sit in the dunker spot, have a simplified offense, and then just dominate on defense, I think his production would be really, really high. But we've talked about this a lot before, right? The Spurs organization said, we don't want you to just have this normal progression. We want you to have the ball in your hands the whole time because we're rebuilding and we want to develop your offense. And of course, that's where he's struggled is on offense, right? Turnovers, poor shooting percentage, stuff like that. So I think like his production, take it with a grain of salt, right? His production could be a lot different if they were actually trying to win, which they are not. As far as the injury goes, they're saying he's going to make a complete recovery, but with blood clots, you know, let's wait and see. I'm very concerned about how it's going to go for him. The last thing I'll say though is when when the thing at the All Star game happened. Well, so first of all, what they did is they just started like throwing a bunch of shots and intentionally missing to save time. They thought it would be some loophole, that would let them win, and they got disqualified, right? Immediately, everyone said, Chris Paul, it's his idea. He's the heel. He's the one who wanted to do it. But afterwards, there is video evidence. No, this was all Wembanyama's idea, and Chris Paul went along with it. So similar to pro wrestling, there's a bait and switch on who the real heel was at the All
I
Star
mean,
break.
and that's just so, I mean, it's so weird to be a fan. It's especially an analytics fan because we've discussed this over years and years, Brian. It's so easy to become almost like personally detached. And over the years, I've actually started to push back against that in our analytics like debate. Instead of saying Carmelo Anthony was overpaid or this player was a draft bust, I'll just go like, get your money, do your thing. And flip side, as a fan, to be like, this is what I want. It's like, dude, a Chris Paul, Victor Wembanyama heel turn with an upgrade to the team, leading to a push to get to the play-in spot in this year's NBA playoffs, and maybe get an upset or something would have been an amazing story. And now we're not gonna get that. So that's a real bummer. And I mean the metaphor, I guess, if we're going for other sports, right, would be as they were like they didn't they like the grounding the football, right? Like for football, there's rules like that. You actually have to have like forward momentum and they have to believe it's a pass. You can't just like throw
Intentional
the ball
grounding, yeah.
away. Yeah, you can't. So basically, Victor Wembanyama tried to do intentional grounding in an all-star, and we've said this, the all-star game doesn't matter. So I love this kind of stuff. Like
Yep.
I am completely okay trying to game the all-star game And I love all parts of it. I hope Victor Wembanyama full recovery. Um, Speaking of other Dallas teams, I meant to say Texas teams, Brian. Um, Texas is just kind of cursed right now. It's a bummer because for years and years and years, the Rockets, Mavericks, and Spurs were they could have been a conference on their own. I actually got some love way back in the day when Mark Cuban was still a majority owner of the Mavericks, where I was just like, if the NBA had restructured conferences and divisions, and the Mavericks weren't in a division with the Spurs, the Rockets, and the Grizzlies regularly, they probably could have made an extra finals or two. Because remember, we used to have really inane rules about seeding based on the conference you were in. So you could be like the second best team in the West, and you would get the fourth seed because you were in the if you were in the same division as another team. And routinely, the Mavericks and the Spurs were both top seeds, and so they would fight over stuff like that, which would give the Mavericks and Spurs both harder paths in the playoffs to the NBA Finals. And so Cuban was like, "Yep, absolutely." Because it's like there are a couple of years I looked at and was like, "Man, if the Dallas Mavericks had been seeded second instead of fourth or fifth this year, they probably would have, on strength of schedule adjusted playoff margin, made an NBA Finals at minimum." And Houston is coming back, right? Because of the Thompson, I don't know which one, Brian. I don't know if they do a Lopez thing and switch randomly, which was the conspiracy theory back in the day.
They both
But
played
the
together in the All Star game, I think, in the Rising
I
Stars
love
era.
I love the Thompson twins. They're awesome. I
Well,
love the
they're two of
Lopez
the
twins.
best players in the league already, Dre. It's like two young Kawhi Leonards. Like, how good are those guys?
It's
They've
it
taken
is
two crappy teams. Well, maybe the Rockets have a little better history, but Pistons certainly don't. And then all of a sudden, these two teams are deep in the playoff hunt. And I feel like those two brothers are by far the biggest reason.
Yeah, the 2023-2024 NBA hoops where they were both the cover athletes, like awesome to see that work out. So yeah, Amen Thompson turning around the Rockets, and it's like, oh, is Texas back, right? And then the Spurs, Greg Popovich gets injured, Victor Wembanyama gets injured. Dallas, some of it feels like bad luck, but some of it feels self-inflicted. And I'm going to give a shout out to Devin Dignam, who may be saying just a popular conspiracy theory because you're validating others say this, which basically is we already discussed this. The Mavericks traded Luka Doncic for just dropped his name.
Anthony Davis, the
Anthony Davis.
brow.
Sorry, Anthony Davis. You're injured and off the court, out of sight, out of mind. Apologies. Fantastic player, though. So they trade away Luka Doncic for Anthony Davis, and it's kind of like we gave them as much due as we could. Where I was kind of like, this is probably the best you're going to do, but just why would you make that
We
move?
tried to steel man it, didn't we?
Yeah. And then the other thing that's going on is the Mavericks have said, due to ongoing investments in the team and fan engagement, they're going to raise prices next season. So they've lost a star player. Anthony Davis is already injured. And Devin said Sonics to NBA, Sonic NBA fans, like, so it begins. And so basically, this is like a Sonic story. So I get what Devin's saying, actually, with apologies. I thought he was saying the Sonics were hoping they would get the Mavs, but what Devin is saying is Sonics have noticed this trend before. The Seattle Supersonics are like, a new owner comes in, says they're not going to move the team, and they move the team. So those that don't know, Clay Bennett took over the Seattle Supersonics, said, I have no interest in moving the team, and then moved them to Oklahoma City. And another point about that, just real nefarious, is Steve Ballmer had a last second bid to acquire the Seattle Supersonics and keep them in Seattle because, of course, Microsoft, right, in Seattle, and the NBA rejected him. And at first you'd be like, oh, Ballmer's going to be mad. But then, of course, he's able to come in and get the Clippers in the future. So this is a not so subtle conspiracy theory Dave Barry has brought up before, which is as long as the NBA leaves Seattle dormant with a popular history, with a big fan base that loves basketball, the Seattle Storm are still good, right? Of course, for the WNBA, and has, in theory, a renovatable stadium for an NBA team anytime another city says, hey, we're not going to pony up for an NBA team, they can threaten that they're going to send them to Seattle and get paid. So Devin is right. Like we've seen this story before in Seattle. And you were saying the new owners of the Mavericks are like Vegas Tide. And of course, despite years and years of the NBA saying we don't want an NBA team in Vegas, we don't want the conflict of interest with betting. The reality probably is they were just waiting for it to be mainstream. And now that every game is brought to you by DraftKings and FanDuel, and that every game has lines going on, and that ESPN and TNT are like picks of the night, now the NBA is like, yeah, we can put a team in Vegas, I'm sure.
Yeah, and they already have, the Raiders just moved there, and of course they had the Golden Knights in the NHL already. So yeah, they would be the third team in Vegas already. So yeah, that train has already left the station. Yeah, I mean it's the Adelson family, right? They're a famous Las Vegas casino family. Sheldon Adelson was the patriarch. He died a few years ago, but their family bought the Mavericks from Mark Cuban, and that's what the Maverick fans have been worried about ever since, right? They're a Vegas casino family. Are they gonna move the team? They're also like very involved in politics, and I won't get into that, but people are right to mistrust Miriam Adelson. Is all I'm trying to say.
There is, oh my God, like it's kind of like every single thing. It's like checking the Wikipedia article. I'm just like, oh, whoop, whoop, whoop. And then also, I'm trying to remember this right. Apparently, she is the an owner or primary owner in the Sands, and I seem to recall that that's. I'm trying to see, is that like a historical one, or do I just remember it
Yeah,
because
the
I'm old?
Sands is one of the old school casinos, but I think they own all kinds of casinos there.
Yeah, so and there's also you can go look up, as you were saying, Miriam Adelson, go look up on Wikipedia. Like if you're like, man, these are words I would not want associated with me if I owned an NBA team. That's me. Definitely that Wikipedia lights them all up. So yeah, there's nothing like here's what's rough is there are conspiracy theories that are far-fetched and weird, and there are ones that it's like, yeah, this it's funny because I did a post today on Blue Sky where I was saying like I was talking to Dave recently. I'm like, when I started blogging at the Wages of Wins under Dave Barry, it would be funny because I go to Dave and I'm like, we should write this post. And Dave would be like, I've written that before, I've seen it before. And I'm like, no, 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 it's new. And now I'm the same boat, Brian, a decade later. And it's just like, yeah, it's funny where I think all of the topics on our show today, um, heck, even Victor Wembanyama, right? We saw it with like Chris Bosh, are reruns, right? The Dallas Mavericks, we saw this with the Seattle Supersonics. We saw the Seattle Supersonics under new ownership intentionally dismantle themselves to move themselves to a market more related to the owner. Already seen it, right? We're going to talk some metrics and other stuff. We've seen that before. Um, I do think there is possible just when we were talking the Doncic trade and you saying there might not be anything nefarious. They might just be stupid. I can agree with that,
Oh, I
right?
100% think that's true. There's no. Here's the reporting. The reporting is there are no basketball people involved with the decision making on that trade. It's the GM, Nico Harrison. We talked about this last week. Not a basketball guy, a Nike shoe executive. And then, yeah, the Adelson Dumont family, or what, I don't know all that much about them. But yeah, they're not basketball people. They're casino people, right? So, yeah, it seems like Mark Cuban and any basketball people are just not involved.
Yeah, and I mean, well, I think especially now that he's no longer involved, I don't feel as bad kind of trouncing on this. The Mavericks had and still do, by the way, have had just a run of bad PR with, lots of allegations in the front office. Heck, Kristaps Porzingis, when he was traded, had lots of stuff. And when those stories were coming out, and of course, the Mavericks got the big slap on the wrist with a $10 fine to charity, which is how the United States work, right? If you're a multi-billion-dollar company and you do tons of stuff wrong and you are publicly shamed for it, the government comes in and smacks you down with a fine that is worth less than the eighth guy on the bench of your NBA team. America. Um, when all of that was happening, Mark Cuban basically kind of, this was funny to me in a mean way, came forward and was like, I'm not as involved in this. So, he's on Twitter holding the NBA trophy and he goes to Sloan and talks analytics. And then and that's either one of two things, either he's kind of like cutting and running or and I'm more inclined to believe it's the latter. It's you're a billionaire. It's a lot of work to do things like run an NBA team, even run it poorly. That's the irony is I think a lot of NBA teams are inefficient. I still think they have people put in the work, which is what makes me sad. I still think there are coaches reviewing lots of game film. I still think there are scouts doing lots of reports. I still think there are lots of meetings, lots of training. And the mean thing to say is I'm like, yeah, this is probably not efficient, but is what it is. Uh, that's kind of what came out, and I'm more inclined to believe that. So it just comes down to with like NBA front offices, combination of not knowing, it's hard to know stuff, and like I said, it's impossible to say it without me. I mean, just like being stupid, not realizing. So I agree with that. But then these other parts, right? Luka trading Luka Doncic may have been like, let's save some money in the short term. And then of course everybody tells you the tanking rule is valid. So they could have even been believing that. Oh, we'll tank. We'll do exactly what Seattle did. We'll tank and we'll do just what Seattle did. And I do actually want to turn this around. The Oklahoma City Thunder tanked and are, in my opinion, potentially, this is a weird phrase, Brian, the only successful tanking story twice, if that makes any sense at all. And this has been under Sam Presti. So under Sam Presti in Seattle, the Sonics tanked in part to get the team out of Seattle, right? They had to get so bad no one was going to the games so they could say, we're not making any money. This is why we have to move. And Oklahoma has a brand new stadium for us, and Seattle isn't willing to pay the money. And of course, Seattle's like, why would we pay for a 24 win or a 20 win basketball team, right? And then they get out to Oklahoma and Durant and Westbrook and Harden and Kendrick Perkins, kind of rough, right? Look amazing. And they make an NBA finals and it's like the future is bright and then it implodes because it's too expensive. And that's the funny thing is I was just like, oh, was Presti just lucky? And the reality was I think he was incredibly intelligent. And then his owner was like, you're not allowed to spend money and this team he put together fell apart. And the stupid thing, Brian, is he did it again. Like I am I'm fine with one of two ways, Brian. This could be an Orlando Magic. So the Orlando Magic, right, got lucky, drafted Shaq and then Chris Webber, who they turned into Penny Hardaway back in the day. They lucked into two number one
Thanks,
picks back to back.
Warriors.
Oh yeah. Sorry, Brian. The Warriors have made some amazing. If you look at historical bad Warriors trades,
They
they
did
have
get
made.
Chris Webber, Dre, who was not a bad player, but they scuttled the relationship with him, so they traded him after like one or two seasons. So
Yeah, they tra
they
him
just
and
screwed
Don
the whole thing
Nelson.
up. Yeah.
Yeah, and then way back in the day, man, Kevin McHale, Robert Parrish. Look into that. It's fun, Brian.
Yep.
Um, so so it's possible that Presti is like the Magic and that the Magic got Dwight Howard, Shaquille O'Neal, and Penny Hardaway like this amazing confluence of luck, and they scuttled it too. But Presti has now rebuilt a team two times and like owns every pick in the future NBA draft. And this is one where I'm like, it could be luck. It's entirely possible it's luck. People get lucky, but he may just be a good GM, and it seems that way. He seems good at drafting, good at trading. So that's the thing is it's going, oh, we'll do what Seattle did. And it's like, well, do you have Sam Presti? Because it's the same thing when people are like, we'll do small ball like the Warriors. I'm like, do you have Steph Curry and Draymond Green? Because if you don't have Steph Curry and Draymond Green, you're not going to do small ball. So that's kind of the state of the world.
The the way I remember it with the first Oklahoma City team is they decided to pay Perkins over Harden and trade Harden away. That might not be 100% clean on the way that happened, but yeah, they weren't perfectly right on it. The thing I'll say about tanking though is I look at like, do you win a title, right? I take your point though. You could say that first Kevin Durant Oklahoma City team, maybe it counts as a victory, even though they didn't win a title because they were right there, right? They could have easily, they were a good enough team to win a title, and they just didn't do it.
Well, here's something that has come up a lot, and I can even speak to one of our future stories. So the Denver Nuggets way back in the day actually did have an analyst by the name of Dean Oliver on staff. This is a good enough segue because he's the next subject on the script. So Dean Oliver is one of the fathers of NBA analytics, and I got some tea, Brian, or not even tea, just general malcontentness for obvious reasons in a second coming up. Is with the Nuggets. Nuggets also had Brett Baer, rest in peace. Fantastic. I want to say Kentucky, right? My brain is getting Kentucky and
Yeah,
Kansas, but
Kentucky
I believe he went to
Wildcats.
Kentucky with like Rex Chapman, like a lot of like really good players and stuff. Never made the NBA. This one of those things, right, where he's a good college player, doesn't make the NBA, but turns into an agent, front office guy. The Denver Nuggets are looking really good right after they get Carmelo Anthony. The secret sauce, as we know, is in 2003, the Nuggets get Carmelo Anthony, but they also get Andre Miller, Nene Hilario, and Marcus Camby. And that's the real secret sauce of the Denver Nuggets for years and years and years. And then at some point, the management got really upset and they had to trade away Marcus Camby for nothing. And it was basically like the ownership told the smart analytics front office, feel conflicted, but I'll say Dean Oliver is better than most. I'm going to have a lot of negative stuff to say about Dean Oliver in the very near future in this segment, but I will still note that if most NBA teams listened to Dean Oliver, they would improve. That is the state of analytics in the modern NBA. That I don't care about the analytics revolution. If you look at the actions and outcomes of most NBA teams, they clearly do not use the analytics, even of the people we routinely get in fights with. Like, we get in fights with people on the net saying their analytics are bad. And I'm like, your analytics are bad, but that's because you're playing against people like Dave Barry, who has a PhD in economics and teaches econometrics. And you're getting a fight with me. And I'm like an amateur, but I got my like master's degree in the funny things, Brian. It's coming back around like artificial intelligence, computer vision, model testing, right? I have a like minor in mathematics and statistics. So it's like people like myself and Dave, to sound mean, are pro-ish with the numbers. And a lot of people that do analytics do it for fun, and it's fun. It's a fun hobby. It's sports, right? You can't tell someone you're not allowed to like mess around with numbers with sports for fun. This is serious. Like, no, it is a hobby, but the reason for years, Brian, you've seen this, that I will routinely like feel bad as I'm going, you don't want me as a teacher's assistant that has graded math and computer science homework to grade your work because you're doing this for fun. And if you were doing it professionally, it would get graded a lot harsher. And there is one space, professional sports, where you can quote unquote do this professionally. But here's the thing, for most people, until you get to like the GM level, it just does not pay as well. And the standards aren't as high because typically the standards are we want to be able to say we have an analytics squad in our front office or we need a numbers person to validate our decision. They are not asking for someone with the same scrutiny, like I'm saying myself and Dave Barry. So that being said, I'm like Dean Oliver, if you compare him to someone like Dave Barry, a tenured professor with over 50 published articles, who's been like a professional witness in sports cases, who has written a textbook on sports economics. No, he doesn't compare to that. He still beats the average NBA front office in terms of confidence, which makes me sad. So, that just is what it is when it comes down to like analytics and being able to judge the smart things. But even with that, when he was with the Denver Nuggets ownership didn't want to do two things. They didn't want to trade Carmelo Anthony, even though Melo wanted out and the analytics squad, I know, was like, listen, we can get so much for Melo if you let us trade. Like, if you let us trade Melo, we can turn him into something good. And the front office didn't want to, like, the ownership didn't want to let him do that. And additionally, they were also like constrained where the ownership was like, we're not going to go over the cap. Very Moneyball, very, very Oakland Athletics, where the ownership is telling Billy Bean's like, I got these numbers. If you let me spend the money, I'll get you a great team. And they're like, can you do it without spending the money? Lots of NBA front offices end that way. And I'm willing to bet Presti was in a similar boat. In past, we have criticized Presti for signing Kendrick Perkins, which put them over the cap, which is why Harden walked. I'm going to make a mistake here and like put words in Presti's mouth or just do a thought experiment. I'm willing to bet Presti thought, hey, you know what? We got Durant, we got Westbrook, we got Harden. On paper, all three of these players, top five draft picks, all score over 20 points a game. They look MVP-ish. And heck, all of them became MVPs. If we have that squad and I go to my ownership and say, look it, we just made an NBA finals. If you just pony up for Harden, oh my gosh, the places will go. And they said no. I'm willing to bet that's what happened. I'm willing to bet that Presti's thinking was, I can overpay for Perkins and it's fine because I'm going to get the budget to pay for Harden. And then they're like, no, we can't let you do it. And I mean, we've seen this kind like this is like a normal plot point in movies or historical, like, oh, this company screwed up on business, where someone's like, if you just give me 5 million for this, we'll be rich. And the person says no, and then someone else invests in it and gets super rich. Like, that's nothing new. So that's my, when we're looking back at historical Thunder, which we have done over here, I'm willing to bet that's what happened.
Yeah, it's very possible. There's a lot of reporting on it. It's such a long time ago. I don't really remember how it went down, but I will say, to turn it back to the Mavericks, I think it's kind of the same principle, right? Like imagine you and I bought a sports team in some sport that we knew nothing about, and we just parachuted down into that team, and we started talking, to the to the front offices. They're like, yeah, so we've got this player, and he's kind of a fat guy who drinks beer, and he wants to be paid $400 million. That's our way forward. Like, if you knew nothing about that sport, what would you think about that, right? You might be willing to make that decision. So, yeah, ownership who doesn't know about how the sport actually works has always been a problem, and it always will be. And it's their money, right? That's the bottom line here, Dre. Is we're talking all about competition and the team and winning, and that's kind of a mugs game, if you want to put it that way, right? The owners don't, I mean, maybe some of them do, but deep down, it's like it's a business. They have to take care of their bottom line before they can worry about other stuff. And if you're not experienced enough and you don't realize that that beer drinking guy Luka is one of the best players in the league, you're not gonna, you're not gonna get it done, baby. You're not gonna get it done.
Well, I was definitely hearing like echoes of Stone Cold when you were talking about that, when you're saying bottom line and beer drinking, right? And this was a classic story in wrestling, WWF at the time, and a rival organization called WCW, which was owned by Ted Turner, Turner Broadcasting
Now
Network.
owned by WWE, they bought him out.
Now that, but here's the thing, that's what happened is Ted Turner was a huge wrestling fan and was like, I'm never going to sell wrestling because it was actually Crockett Promotions way back in the day.
Yep.
He bought it, it became WCW. And he was like, I'm never going to sell this. But then he either sold off either like sold ownership or like, di got diluted in terms of ownership because it's a multi-billion-dollar company. And the new ownership was like, we hate wrestling. And it's not hard, right? If you're a quote unquote professional business and you look at wrestling and you've got men in spandex cutting their heads open and at that time Attitude Era drinking beer like you go watch old DX clips doing
Crotch
things that look
chop.
very,
Yeah.
yeah, very very uncouth, right? You go back to that and they're like, we don't want to be associated with this, right? We're rich. We're rich. No, we're rich, right? Old money versus new money kind of dynamic.
Right.
And you're kind of saying the same thing where like you come into the NBA and it's hilarious because WCW, they wound up just selling it to WWF because they weren't even interested in keeping it around. Um, an owner, I'm dropping his name, Eric Bischoff in WCW had put in like a pitch to basically buy it, but basically wanted to keep broadcasting it on TN on Turner's network. And they were just like, no, we don't want anything to do with wrestling. We would rather sell it for 5 million than keep it, even though it's worth money, because we want no association with it. And like what you're saying about Lucas Max, the same, right? Is they're going, we would rather have an NBA team in Las Vegas than have a winning team in Dallas. And the flip side, comparing that to wrestling at least, is like, at least some of that motivation makes sense because you're like, how much is an NBA team in Vegas worth, right?
Have you brought up
Compared
the
to Dallas.
major league point yet, Dre? That this is like the movie Major League?
Oh yeah, and so I did bring up the shout out to Devin Dignam saying like we've seen this before with the Sonics, but I had made a crack at it with Major League. So the movie Major League, this is rough, Brian, because so many parts of it age terribly, but I'm also going to say this. Major League is one of the best sports analytics movies of all time. And it actually predates the Moneyball story. So, Major League in its first cut, it's a baseball movie in the 80s, kind of a slapdash romantic comedy with a lot of other stuff in it. That's about the Cleveland Indians, that is the team, and them having a horrible team fight for a pennant spot, and it turns out that the owner is actually moneyballing it, but we don't know that, and we wind up never knowing that because when the first movie came out and that was revealed, audiences hated that and wanted to hate the owner, so they flipped it. The owner was a woman, so shocker, right? So that's the major league story, and the plot we are given that they left in was the owner wants to tank the team because if the attendance falls enough, she is allowed to sell the team to Miami, and then she can move to Miami because it's a team in Cleveland, and that makes a heck of a lot of sense. Like, right, like, and actually, ironically, in the movie, I think she's a Vegas showgirl originally, so like could have done Vegas too, would have been funny. So that's the premise, and that's been used a couple times in movies, and then like I said, we've seen real world major leagues, the Seattle Supersonics to the Oklahoma City Thunder, possibly now the Dallas Mavericks too. What do you think they name them if they go to Vegas? I mean, the Aces is just too. That's I
Oh
don't
no,
care what
Las Vegas
NBA.
Mavericks works really well, I think.
You think just Las Vegas Mavericks?
Sure.
I like it. Actually, that you know what sucks, Brian? It's a better name. Like like you're right.
But
That is
they
a
need
pity.
to stay in Dallas, Dre. I really hope they don't move.
I mean, I think trains left the station, and in a couple of years we get to pat ourselves on the back. So that's all the stuff that was going on there. But in terms of analytics, movies, etc., hard to do stuff in the front office. Owners getting constrained. But let's get back to an analytics person. So Brian, Dean Oliver is an interesting name. 2006, he writes the book Basketball on Paper, which many people consider one of the first books of basketball analytics. What I'm going to ask you to do, if you have a copy of it on your desk, which most NBA analytics fans do, they just don't haven't read it all, you can crack it open and you will see so many references to Dave Barry in there. And I have mentioned that after the fact, Brian, years and years later, because I now have it on Kindle, when I have reread it, I have found the Midwestern passive aggressiveness against Dave Barry in the book. And it does frustrate me because the reality of that book is Dean Oliver spent hours and hours emailing with Dave, asking analytics questions. And Dave, I will shout this out, Dave Barry, writer of Wages of Wins, Stumbling on Wins. You can follow him, Wages of Wins on Blue Sky. He is a professor of sports economics at Southern Utah University, one of the most intelligent sports economists out there, as well as one of the most, is a weird read, like he's kind of cantankerous, like his personality is a little bristly, but he's one of the most friendly in that if you are someone that is interested in sports analytics, at least back in the day, and you would like email him, he was just a fountain of knowledge and so willing to share. And that's how I got into it. I was literally like working on a basketball project for fun with Wages of Wins, like with the wins produced metric. And I was emailing like, how do I do this? What do I do for this? And that's how we eventually wound, and Patrick Minton as well. And that's how we wound up with the box score geeks. So Dean Oliver got so much input, so much information from Dave Barry. And in fact, one of the chapters of Basketball on Paper flat out is Dave Barry's research. And the reason I was like offended after the fact rereading it is so much of this book, Dean Oliver's like, thank this person for this, thank you, this person for this. He does not directly thank Dave in the acknowledgments. He says, thank you to all of these people. Let me see if I can actually get it in front. This is fun, Brian. He says, thank you to a bunch of people, but then does not
There
directly
it is.
thank Dave Barry. He says, like, I'm happy to have met him. There's that. And then additionally, there is a chapter for with Dave Barry's research where he lists Dave Barry as the author, but at the end of the book, at the end of the chapter, sorry, right? If that makes any sense. So yeah, he goes, all right, so listen to this trend, Brian. This is fun. So he goes, thanks to Clay Callum and the Full Court Press website for numerous thought-provoking conversation. Thanks to Swarna Ganta for initially and perhaps unintentionally inspiring me to write this all. I owe an immense debt of gratitude to my very good friend Dave Carter for providing me shelter, wireless internet, comments on chapters, and a good atmosphere for getting this done. I really can't thank you enough. Now, this is where it gets funny, these next two people. Jefferson Sweeney's complimentary videotape helped me out on one of these chapters. So, right, like Jefferson Sweeney doesn't get a thank you. It's like, hey, your videotape. And the next, Dave Barry provided me with inside information on sports economics that helped me to make my work a bit deeper. Fuck you, Dean. I'm glad the internet introduced us. So, like, and then after that, thanks to Environ International, thanks to Ross Russell. So literally, in Dean Oliver's acknowledgments, he's like, thank you, thank you, thank you. This guy gave me a tape. Dave Barry provided me a little bit of insight. And then one of these chapters, the one on parody, the power of parody is chapter 9 in Basketball on Paper, page 108. And it's a really good chapter. But the point is, end note. This is end note. So end of the chapter. End note is Martin Schmidt and Dave Barry's paper, Competitive Balance and Attendance, the case of Major League Baseball, served as the primary reference for the results on whether competitive balance was beneficial. That's a full chapter. Chapter 9 is the power of parity. It gets an end note, not a beginning, that says this is based on Dave Barry's work. So that kind of stuff has bristled me the wrong way after the fact. And Brian, again, because history just repeats itself, you showed me this. I wouldn't have seen it. Dean Oliver over at ESPN. So he has bounced around between working for NBA teams and working for ESPN. He's back at ESPN and he released a metric called net points. And I know the reason this tickles you, Pink, Brian, is back in the day, I decided to start calling actually a variant of one of Dean Oliver's metrics. Dean Oliver in Basketball and Paper introduces this term called true shooting percentage. The way true shooting percentage works is in basketball, because we have the 3 point line and the free throw, you can't just look at points. So when we're doing that in basketball, you have to say how many points did the person score and how many possessions did they give to score those points. And the easiest way to do it is to say how many shots did they take and how many free throws did they take. Interesting point, Brian. Simple update we could do to wins produced is to actually use play-by-play data to just look at possession ending free throws, right? Because if you go to the line 3 times as an example, like players like Steph Curry do, only the third free throw ends the possession, right? The first two do not. So there are improvements we could do there. I said, hey, I'm just going to do net points. So instead of using true shooting percentage, which is, as the name implies, a percentage, Dean Oliver introduces this in Basketball and Paper. I said, I want to look at net points, namely, how many points minus shot attempts do we get if we actually normalize for points versus shot attempts and free throws. And then we just use a proxy, 0.44 for free throw, which is an estimate. Like I said, that's off because some people are very good at free throws, some people are not, as well as some players like, some players will get a lot of and one free throws. They'll make the shot. Like you look at players like Shaquille O'Neal. Some players like Steph Curry will get fouled on threes. Other players will get fouled on two. Really, you could make this more exact. And for what it's worth, that information is there. And I will actually be talking with Dave Barry next week. So I may be trying to make some improvements to wins produced. Minor ones. Here's the other key thing. So using Dave Barry's research, I keep bringing him up. Using the box score statistics, we explained so much. And these tiny things that you can do, like I'm talking about, looking at charges, adjusting free throw rates a little, do very little because really you look at players that are good at keeping and getting possessions. So that's rebound and low turnovers, and good at shooting efficiency relative to the league. And if you look for players like that, the honest truth is you can find a winning basketball team, which is what like Dave Barry asserts. And I am laughing because, like I said, Dean Oliver wrote like a book and is like, here's all of the ways to look for little intricate ways, like all of the things that are wrong with analytics, et cetera. And like I said, he's got a new metric called net points. And this was, like I said, the first thing that makes me laugh is one, I came up with the metric with that name. I'm not the first, I'm sure, by the way. There's a now defunct site, Brian, called NBAmetrics.com that also had net points. And this site, I'm so sad that they're under. They did what I wanted to do, Brian. They actually did era adjusted. So they did net points per era because I would, NBA metrics, if I recall a few times, we didn't get in arguments, but I would just be like, this player's like James Harden is having the greatest net point season ever right now. And he's like, no, you actually have to look at like Kareem's because James Harden relative to the league is this many points, but Kareem's relative to the league is this many. And Brian, here's the sad state of the world. During the pandemic, Dave Barry and myself got busy. The Wages of Wins domain, we lapsed on payment, and then they wiped it. And basically, sorry to say, man, pandemic, a lot of us were busy. So, Wages of Wins, the old site is gone. Dave has recreated a lot of the articles over at wagesofwins.substack.com. NBA metrics, I looked into it. That is now under. So the internet is a sad place because a lot of stuff disappears. So it's actually understandable for Dean Oliver to come out with a new metric at ESPN that's like introducing net points. But I'm just like, by the way, if you were paying attention to the metric scene during the heyday back in the blogosphere days before Facebook, destroyed the internet, this has been named like 2 or 3 times before. And what it is, Brian, if I am to understand correct, is it is basically a black box metric that, tries to assign credit or blame. So we're basically like Dean Oliver came up with the metric called win shares back in the day, which was very similar, which he discusses in Basketball and Paper. That was 2006. It's almost 2026, and he's basically doing it again. And the funny thing is, though, you go to the article on it. So Dean Oliver on his Twitter and Blue Sky says, introducing net points, the latest NBA metrics and its early NBA its amazing early findings. And he doesn't explain how it works. He just does not. What he says is, let me see if I can do this. Okay. People can have their opinions, but this article isn't about opinions. It's about an all new NBA metric ESPN has created called Net Points, which uses play by play data to evaluate a player's performance. It quantifies every rebound, shot, turnover, and free throw. Incidentally, those are all box score statistics, but cool. And assigns credit and blame to the players on the court. It divides credit and blame based on the difficulty of the player's contribution to the success or failure of the team. Brian, so much low hanging fruit. I'm going to pause. I know I've been talking your ear off. So I'm going to pause to let you talk. But this is like Dean Oliver with that one sentence has thrown such a softball that I want to smash, but I'll let you talk first.
Yeah, well, this is something we talk about a lot. Is that the di- so this is what you started the monologue with, right? The difference between academics and people working in other areas. And I mean, this is what they have to do. So let me just again speculate about how this came down. Dean Oliver's here at ESPN. He's there with the editors and whoever else he works with, and they're like, "What's gonna get the page views? What's gonna get the hits? What do people want to read? What are people interested in? Let's put out a metric and put out some cool graphics, and people like it." And that's what they're worried about, right? They're not worried about furthering understanding of basketball in general. Now, that being said, this is very tantalizing because using player tracking to better assign credit for box scores, I think is a very fruitful way to move forward, right? But
I missed some of
but
that. You were
here's the
saying, well, I
problem,
mean,
though.
oh, go ahead. Yeah,
Well,
I'll let
yeah,
you go first.
the last thing you said is the problem, the difficulty. And this is like our biggest pet peeve with what a lot of fans and analysts say is that doing difficult things, for some reason people think Kobe Bryant taking a fadeaway shot, with someone on him should be worth more points than just someone dunking it wide open under the basket. Like, people want to give more points per basket based on the difficulty of this shot. That's just how fandom is. And people want to give more credit to those players. And it seems like that's what Dean Oliver is doing here, right? He's giving the people what they want, even if it's not moving things forward.
Yeah, so there's so much. Now, first off, when you were talking what they want, you were saying page use ish. What people want, and both analysts and like sites like ESPN is proprietary, right? They want their own metric. So for lack of, it's funny to call it this, but essentially is because Dave shared all of his work. A a open source metric like wins produced is not what they want because anybody can go make it. So if ESPN says we use net points, we use per, this is our metric, right? Give me 2 seconds. I'm gonna
Yeah,
have to edit
sure.
around this, but I want to let
And
the
by the way, that
dog
would be a great silver
dog.
lining of net points promulgating is maybe we can get rid of per once and for all. But I mean, yeah, it's see, I can't bury Dean Oliver like you can, Dre, just because I don't know him personally. I haven't, talked to
Mhm.
him at all. I don't have the frame of reference, so I'm gonna have to throw it back to you on this stuff.
Yeah, yeah. So, but you were right where you're saying what do the editors want, and they want proprietary, right? And here's the thing: if you do proprietary, I don't know why I'm saying it like that, Brian, but I love it. Proprietary. That's a lot of
Proprietary.
fun. They also have to give a pitch as to why it's better. So the reason Dean Oliver is saying play by play and difficulty is if he says we've come up with a new box score statistic, that's dead, right? Like Basketball Reference kind of won that game with BPM, which depresses me, but it is what it is. He has to say something new. So you're right. It's like they need a proprietary metric that has a sticker selling point. And I have found this so many times in analytics, and I have found this so many times in analytics that basically, as long as you have a good sticker pitch, and no one's going to check your math. If you say my metric accounts for defense, no one's going to look and see how it does it or what it does it. So that's the first thing. Now, The funny thing about assigning credit and level of difficulty, because those are the two things to hit. Um, Dave Barry actually has a chapter in Stumbling on Wins about consistency of NBA statistics player to player from the box score. And this is something I would actually love to get as just like a running total to show it. But the reality is, if we look at all of the sports, basketball has the most stable, consistent player to player of any sport. And it's like Moneyball, the Moneyball analytics revolution, right? Things like using whip, like basically only looking for home runs and strikeouts and walks from pitchers and ignoring other things, right? Because those can be out of their control, right? A pitcher can lose games even if they're a good pitcher because their defense isn't great or their offense doesn't give them enough runs. What you can really control for is the things that are pitcher skill, how many walks they give, how many strikeouts
Yeah.
they do, how many home runs. Those are like really bad pitches because they go out of the park they give. If you adjust for that, like you can be very consistent pitchers. But that like miracle stat that the movie and book Moneyball are like, oh my God, this was such a breakthrough, pales in comparison to just rebound rate of an NBA center, right? And if we also look at the impact of rebound rate of the average NBA center, it is more important than other stuff. So in basketball, the boring story is the box score statistics explain winning because they have to. They are recording things that impact winning, and they are incredibly consistent on the players, and the players are incredibly stable year over year, which means basketball is like the raw stats on their own solve so much of the problem. It's not that there aren't other problems to solve, but the funny thing is what I was just telling you. If all of the NBA teams used good analytics, then you would really want to be doing stuff like Dean Oliver's doing, looking at the play by play, looking at the synergy. But until even half of the NBA does that, and I assure you they don't, it is more than fine to just say, do a cursory glance at the box score, get players that are really good by the box score, and move on. The second part we both mentioned was difficulty. That doesn't matter. Shout out to Patrick Minton. One of the earliest articles on the Boxscore Geeks site, which when he wrote it was actually called the NBA Geek, was like the ugly baskets count too. And he basically was talking about the basket doesn't care how the ball gets there. Dean Oliver, in his original book, Basketball and Paper, held on to this really stupid idea. I'm sorry, I'm just, man, I'm burying, right? About the skill curve is what he calls them. And that chapter ages terribly too if you read the skill curve chapter. Don't have time for today, maybe on a future show, Brian. And the skill curve concept is the more shots a player takes, their efficiency is just going to have to drop, right? Because they're using more possessions. And that doesn't line up with reality. It can, right? If you can only take a couple types of shots, and if you were going to take more shots, you would have to force them. Sure. But if you've got a player, if you've got a Steph Curry or a James Harden who can shoot well from three, and you're like, hey, can I get him open for more threes? Like, yeah, like, what if they take more threes? And in fact, I recall, Brian, back in the day, Steph Curry was so fascinating to us because I was like, he's an MVP player. Um, should be tapped out. He'd have like another jump. And just like, oh yeah, what if he just shot more? And he's like, yeah, sold. He's like, why not? So the idea of the skill curve does not line up with reality, but it was what Dean Oliver was doing to justify players like Allen Iverson, Kobe Bryant, and I'm forgetting there's actually a player on the Mavericks. I'm forgetting at the time, but who shot a lot at the time.
Jason
But it's so many
Terry?
years ago, Brian.
No,
Not Jason,
not Jason
before
Terry.
Jason Terry.
Yeah, okay.
And Jason Terry was actually good in his prime. He
Yeah,
just
he
got old
was.
because
He
age
was.
comes for all players, which Dave wrote about in Wages of Wins and Stumbling on Wins. But the basic point being, the basket doesn't care how it gets there. The skill curve, this notion that a player cannot take more shots without getting less efficient, doesn't line up with reality. Basketball really just says get the ball through the hoop and keep the ball, and difficulty doesn't matter. So when you are trying to make metrics that are explicitly trying to give credit based on difficulty, you can also find yourself rewarding players like Kobe Bryant, who you and I have talked this a lot, where it's like there is definitely a level of machismo in sports, which is fine. And it's why Kobe Bryant gets a lot of credit because it's going, Kobe Bryant and like players like Michael Jordan, they didn't just want to win. They wanted to beat their opponent. And so that's why they'll get so much respect from other
Sometimes
players because they're
literally
saying,
beat them with their fists.
I was watching, by the way, coming back to that, a thing about Charles Barkley.
That
There is
him
an
as well.
infamous there's an infamous brawl between the 76ers and the Celtics. And Charles Barkley holds Larry Bird, well, I want to say Dr. JT's off on him. And Charles Barkley was talking about that and was saying, look at, I wasn't holding him to hit him. I was trying to pull him away. But then he's like, but when I tried to split it up, like then Dr. J went after him and they were
What
like,
a troll.
he's like, why didn't you pull Dr. J away? He's like, if I pulled Dr. J away in Philly, I would have gotten killed. So is what it is. But yeah, difficulty doesn't matter. And that's also the difficult part too when you're explaining it to people is you're going, hey, Kobe Bryant made that really difficult shot, but it would have been smarter to pass the ball for an easier shot. It would have made more sense for Kobe Bryant to pass to Shaquille O'Neal to get a dunk than to take that shot and beat his man. But ESPN is going to show the buzzer beater over his man. One of my favorite clips that I cannot find, but I believe it's real, Brian, is this interview with Magic Johnson. And there is this infamous play where Magic Johnson scores a baby hook over like three Celtics. And the play was drawn up for Kareem to get the shot at the hoop. And I actually wrote an article, I want to say at Wages of Wins on this, where you can rewatch the play and literally see Kareem get open, Magic shoot over these guys. And in the interview, he was just like, how many times do I get to beat the Celtics with a shot? Right? It's in the culture. It's hard to do it, right? In basketball, beating your man one on one is something players love. It's something fans love, right? Posterizing dunks. Posterizing dunks is something that always gets me because I'm like, you realize if you get posterized in a dunk, you stood your ground it in at minimum a 6 foot tall, 200-pound person running at you full force and jumping in the air at least 2 or 3 feet, right? Like that is ridiculous to call that be like, ah, oh, you got schooled. I'm like, that would be like standing still for getting punched in the face by a boxer. And but because the player wins, we call it that, right? So
Dre, you know, of course,
that's
what they
just kind
call
of
the
it.
opposite of getting posterized, right? They say he made a
What do we
business
got?
decision. He made a business decision.
I did not I cannot believe
No,
I've
listen to
done this
that.
all
They
these years without
announcers say
hearing it.
that
So
all the
yeah,
time. They're like, "Oh, he did," because like, yeah, if a 260-pound center is coming down the lane like a freight train, it's human nature to get out of the way. I think you have to really like be ornery and be well trained to actually get in there and try to defend that. So yeah, NBA players are amazing. Is all I'm trying to say.
so I'm aware I spilled some tea. The last thing I want to note about this space, which depresses me, and it may still be the case with sports analytics, is the rushing for people to get the proprietary metric to work for a team at the expense of others. And that's still the case. And you'll notice, like it says, I'm reading another article line out of this article from Dean Oliver on net points. But net points captures more than the box score, including transition opportunities, matchup and help defense, and creating better shots for teammates. Now, by the way, there is the cautionary tale to anybody if you read an article like this. It doesn't show us work, doesn't mean anything. In econometrics, the stuff Dave uses, if you don't show your coefficients and like the error value, it doesn't mean anything. Credit to someone, this is really fascinating, Brian. In the analytics space, there was for a time, and I can't quite tell. It seems like we're swinging back towards the box scores, what Dean Oliver's doing, but you have to rebrand it, right? There used to be this box score versus plus minus argument. Plus minus being how well you do with when you're on the court versus when you're off the court, with the opponents on the court, with the opponents off the court, trying to do us math, like right, the Mavericks when Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan are on the like not the Mavericks, the Lakers when Kobe Bryant is on the court and Michael Jordan on the opposing team is on the court is +2, but when Michael Jordan's off, Kobe's +5. But with Kobe's off, it's plus this, and trying to do some math to say, trying to determine how much those kind of things match. That was plus minus. Box score was what we did at Wages of Wins, what Dean Oliver did with win shares. You look at the box score, you say, here's how much that's worth. It was a skew for a little bit of time over that. And one of the big names in plus minus was a man by the name of Wayne Winston, still around. I am actually like cordial with him on the internet. And he, at bare minimum, he showed his work. He was like, here's the error terms. Here's what it says. Here's how I made the model. Like Wayne Winston built people what they wanted, but also showed his work. And his work let people like Dave Barry and others say, hey, the error term is giant, or the year-to-year consistency doesn't matter, right? He basically showed his work, gave the model that people wanted, but showed his work, and I have a lot of respect for that. Whereas when you get stuff like this, where Dean Oliver is saying, here's what my metric does and why it's great, and then he shows you the numbers, and we don't see how it's constructed so we can recreate it, and we don't see any tests on why it's as good as it is. And math, at this point, Brian, this included so many tests on things like this that Excel can. When Dave Barry started Wages of Wins, like the book, he told me that he had issues because Excel would crash under the amount of data,
Yeah.
which was trivial at the time. Nowadays, my Excel on like my Google Sheet can handle that amount of data that would crash Dave's computer back in the day. Nowadays, it is inexcusable to not do like proper tests and show your work. But the reason you don't want to do that is exactly, you nailed it, Brian. I hate when you nail, like, look for the motivation. ESPN wants views, proprietary data, tell people the story they want to hear. Dean Oliver is swinging the analytics conversation back to the box score, but the box score got unpopular. So you have to explain why this box score metric, because like notice that he's like this box score metric uses a he's like I'm still laughing when he's just like net points uses shots, turnovers, free throws, and assigns credit and blame to the players on the court. That's the box score as an FYI, but is what it is. Um, and has to say it does more than that, right? He has to rebrand the box score to be popular. He has to make a metric that he doesn't show the work for, because then if you start showing the work, people can poke holes in it. And Dave Barry is actually the proof of this. Dave Barry showed his work for wins produced. Dave Barry showed his numbers. And lots of people in the analytics sphere came and attacked wins produced and said, see, here's why it's wrong. See, here's why it's wrong. See, here's why it's wrong, as compared to per and win shares. And the reason people didn't do that wasn't because per and win shares didn't do the same problems that they were allegedly complaining about in wins produced. It's that no one knew the math on those to explain why they didn't work. So yeah, Brian, history just repeats.
Yeah, that's right. And I used the word tantalizing earlier because, yeah, to me that phrase you said, using player tracking to try to better assign the box score, that's like something Greg Steele was trying to do, in the Greek God of Stats. Is that the name of his book? I think.
Yeah, that
Yeah,
was his book.
yeah. And so Greg Steele is trying to say we're going to use player tracking. We're going to try to also figure out this defensive load. Right, is one of these metrics you went back and forth with him on. And so maybe Dean Oliver is going along that path as well. Maybe by saying difficulty of contribution, he's saying something like that. Maybe he's not talking about what we're talking about at all, layups versus fadeaways. But we just don't know based on this article, right? We just have no idea. That's the frustrating thing.
I'm going to end this being a conventional fan, Brian, because I can be just like conventional stats fans.
Actually,
Because
Dre,
here's how it goes.
can I say one more thing before we go off of
Okay,
this?
yeah. Then before we end up and go,
Yeah,
yeah, let's.
yeah.
Okay, what do you got?
So, actually, can I read to you? This is from Patrick Mitten, June 23rd, 2011. Article is titled "Welcome to the NBA Geek." And let me find it again. I lost my place here. Here we go. So this is one of the paragraphs near the bottom. He says, this is the one that always bugs me. Why do people care about how the ball goes into the basket? As my coach used to say in high school, hey, the ugly ones also count 2 points. If Aldrich's jumper looks prettier, it doesn't count extra. So this came from Patrick's high school coach originally, Dre, about the ugly shots. I believe this is the first article ever written, right? If it's welcome to the NBA Geek. So yeah, this is where it all started.
I'll shout out two people to follow that up with two other huge shout outs. One was Roger Federer gave like a really nice commencement speech, or a speech somewhere, and was saying he's won like 80% of his games, which is like ridiculous for a tennis player, but that he's won like 53% of his points. And so what he was saying was like everything's just a point, was like how his brain had to think. And like basketball is like that, right? Like dunk, a posterizing dunk, a buzzer beater counts just the same. And that's what makes it so boring is basketball has like 200 plus possessions a game and they're all worth about the same. And so you have to do all this math to add them up. And that's very boring. And people hate that. So yeah, absolutely. Then another huge shout out, by the way, is actually Hubie Brown, an amazing coach, ABA and NBA, and amazing announcer. And I remember reading Terry Pluto's Loose Balls about the ABA and reading just some quotes from, like you're saying, like the 70s from Hubie Brown. And he's got it cracked because he was talking point margin and like possessions. And I'm reading it. And I was just like, oh yeah, this guy had it figured out too. Like
Did he
a
retire
lot of
from
these concepts,
broadcasting recently, Dre, or is he
he's
still going?
is he, if he's still going, I'd be shocked because he's ancient. But if he's still broadcasting, good
I'm
on you,
sorry
Hubie
for
Brown.
interrupting, but
Oh no,
I'm
he's
curious.
it says
He
yeah,
might
and he
still be
did
going.
the Kentucky Colonels, by the way, one of the most undervalued, underrated like teams in NBA history. Just like, and I'm going to call them NBA history because the NBA, like
Sure.
WCW, was
That's right.
acquired. The ABA acquired the ABA. Oh, this is a bummer. So, Brian, by the way, we are coming up on a little over the 1 month anniversary. His last game was February 9th of
Okay, he
this
did.
year.
He did retire.
Oh, holy cow.
Yes, what a
Good
great
on you, Hubie
broadcaster
Brown.
as well.
Now, my conventional fan thing, Brian. So I don't know how this metric works. I just told you all the problems with it. But I'm going to be able to look at this and validate something I like. So I'll say maybe there's a little point. So he's got net points. He's got offensive net points and defensive net points. And if you look, the best offensive player in the NBA, my boy Nikola Jokic, 365.19 net points. What does that mean? Who knows, Brian? Okay. By the way, he also says that Nikola Jokic is pretty good at defense, 61.42 defense. So not bad. Not normalized. Don't know what it means, but it's green, Brian. Green is good, right? If you go to ESPN analytics.com/NBA net PTS, it's there. Now, apparently, the best defender in the league by Dean Oliver's metric is Sengun on Houston. Okay. But he is worth 110.79 defense. So here's the irony, Brian. This is something I've actually agreed with for a while. One of the big things the wins produced would get bashed for was defense. We couldn't properly quantify defense, right? Like, you know, yeah, you say Klay Thompson's horrible, but he's a great switching defender and you're not counting him right. And my kind of counter, I actually threw to a guy named Matt Moore who talked about Kawhi Leonard doing this, which is this concept that you could neutralize Kawhi by putting him on an island.
Matt
So
Moore is
Kawhi's the
awesome,
best
by the way.
defender.
Read Matt Moore.
Yeah,
He's
love
awesome.
him. Love Matt Moore, first ballot Hall of Famer for wins produced, wages of
Yes.
wins, Boxscore Geeks. Uh, no, sorry. But what I was going to say is he basically pointed out that that's the problem on defense. On offense, a player like Steve Nash or Nikola Jokic can shoot from anywhere and more dangerously can pass the ball anywhere on the court. And then they can immediately get the ball back and do it again. Greg Steele, when we were talking defense, you brought up Greek out of stats, brought this up. You are not allowed to do that on defense. On offense, the Nuggets can say we are going to start the ball with Nikola Jokic. He's going to make a decision. If Nikola Jokic gets trapped or whatever, he's going to pass the ball. And then we have the option to start over if we get the ball back to Nikola Jokic. On defense, you are not allowed to say, we would like Kawhi to guard this player. You're not allowed to do that. They can start the thing up differently. They'll do things like pick and rolls to stop that. They'll pass the ball. They can, as mentioned, put Kawhi on an island. You can give the ball to, say, Michael Porter Jr. and have him stand out by the three, and Kawhi's going to have to guard him, and now he's too far away from Jamal Murray or Nikola Jokic. And Dean Oliver's metric validates this point, right? Nikola Jokic on offense is allegedly 3 times as valuable as the most valuable defender in the league. And what's funny though is that comes down to the box score stuff that we've already looked at. And the one thing I'll say on that when you're like, but what about these players like Ben Wallace and Dennis Rodman that you love, defenders, right? Here's the funny argument I'm going to get back to. Offensive rebounds count, right? And offensive rebounds are part of the offense. You give your team, like whenever I would hear that the Detroit Pistons were playing 4-on-5 with Ben Wallace, it's like, no, no, no. On offense, they have someone that literally lets them start the play over, right? Because the shot clock even resets. Ben Wallace being able to rebound better than anybody in the league at his time was still valuable on offense because he gets the ball, he passes it to Chauncey Billups, and Chauncey Billups can score, right? So I will still even agree, and I wouldn't be shocked. We don't know how under the hood works, but right, if they count offensive rebounds as part of offense, who knows? Or maybe he throws them over in defense. But I agree with a little bit of a point, and it validates something we've gotten into arguments in the past. Kobe Bryant's defense wasn't turning Kobe into a top 10 player in the wins produced eyes, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the way you turn Kobe Bryant into a top 10 player is by saying his difficult shots are important, his usage is important. Dean Oliver's been doing that forever. We're not going to, but hey, I'll give that to this, Brian. That's the one nice thing I'll say before we hit our last topic.
Yeah, I'll just say on this, Shengun is the one big outlier I can see
Shengun,
here.
thank you, thank you.
Actually, I've heard people say the pronunciation is closer to Schengen, but I think generally people say Shengun, so that's what I say. Anyway, he's a big outlier here. I would say the box score stats kind of consider him to be an average defender. And I would say that conventional wisdom and eye test and my eye test as well say he's below average. Like, this is wild saying he's the best defender in the NBA. And again, why is like where does that come from? I don't know. I think the Rockets' good defense comes from Amen Thompson. I think it comes from Tari Eason, who's hurt right now. I think it even comes from our good old buddy Dylan Brooks is playing pretty good defense there. I don't know anyone other than Dean Oliver who thinks Shengun is kicking ass on defense. So I'm just curious. Like, I'm very curious where that comes from.
I mean, I'm looking at his numbers. He's got good defensive rebounds. I mean, maybe stuff like that. I mean, this falls back to, by the way, to just keep throwing names, the Kobe assist. This was something done by an analyst named Kirk Goldsberry back in the day. And his argument is like, hey, you say Kobe Bryant's bad for missing shots, but hey, hear me out. Those missed shots turn into rebounds. If his team rebounds those and then those rebounds right by the hoop and they're better shots, maybe Kobe's helping his team. And I'm just like, yeah, that's the rebounder. That they're going to rebound. That's what they do. Dwight Howard and Pau Gasol rebounded on the Lakers. They rebounded off the Lakers. They rebounded with other teams. That's what they do. If someone misses a shot and they rebound it, that player's missed shot is not better. It's worth noting the box score geeks, we basically say he's close to average, like an average center. But yeah, but I
But
mean, that's
that
the other thing.
it's from his offensive production, right? Most people say Shengun, young player, does everything on offense, a little bit limited on defense because of his size and athleticism.
He's good at the I mean, basically what I'll give you is his shooting is this year. I don't know what happened, by the way, because he was actually a really good scorer the last 2 years, and this year has fallen off a cliff. It looks like he's trying to shoot threes for some odd reason. He's a good rebounder. So yeah, I agree. Confusing, and I don't know how it works. I'm just saying the only reason he even came up, like I said, is he is the best defender. But by the way, people, if you want this, because I've heard this forever about Nikola Jokic, according to Dean Oliver, you heard it here first. Nikola Jokic is the ninth best defender in the NBA. So there you go.
I buy it.
Yeah, of course, right, Brian? Of course. All right, Brian, very last subject. This, you do get some changes, right? I'm talking about how everything stays the same. There is one little change I wanted to shout out that was wild, which is apparently at this crazy trade deadline, which may be one of the craziest trade deadlines we've ever seen, right? I'll give it like two sentences. The Lakers and Golden State, right? Lakers are number two in the Western Conference now after getting Luka Doncic. You sound some secret sauce for me too, Brian, which is Vanderbilt had been out injured most of the season. Vanderbilt got healthy just before the trade deadline, and they actually went on a 6-game winning streak when he got back. Then they traded for Luka Doncic. Luka Doncic was actually a little rusty. Luka Doncic was actually terrible his first couple games of the Lakers. If you go to Boxscore Geeks, we say he's a little below average with the Lakers, but that is skewed because he was horrible getting the rust off coming to the Lakers, probably new team, injury, etc. But he's on the uphill slide. And in fact, Brian, I'm so angry at this. Um, Ben Guest and myself were looking at Luka Doncic. And we're like, he's not good right now. He's still injured, clearly. And what does he do, Brian? Goes out against my Denver Nuggets. Still doesn't shoot well, but everything else, triple double. Luka Doncic like returns against my Denver Nuggets for the Lakers to beat my Nuggets, and that's part of why they've now overtaken my Denver Nuggets in the West. So Luka Doncic hurt us, took it personally. But basically, Vanderbilt being healthy and Luka Doncic getting the rust off and being on the Lakers, they're looking absolutely fantastic. Jimmy Butler looking absolutely great on the Warriors. I mean, barring a bizarre game to the Mavericks. And actually, we forgot that when we were talking about the free fall because there's so much else about the Mavericks. Other thing is Kyrie Irving is out injured for the season. So Kyrie Irving went off for the Mavericks to beat the Golden State Warriors right before the All-Star break. And now Kyrie is gone too. So yeah, basically the Mavericks have traded Luka Doncic. Anthony Davis and Kyrie are out injured. They're raising ticket prices. I mean, they could not ask for a better scenario to try and sell the team. Whereas the teams that we liked, the Lakers and the Warriors, who went after the stars, it's paying off. It's looking great. And the third team, Brian, they're still looking good. The New York Knicks, that loved what they did for Towns, loved what they did for Brunson. I'm sitting here watching, love player like Hartenstein. They draft well. They tried to trade for Walker Kessler, and apparently it fell apart. They couldn't agree for the asking price. And I can kind of agree, right? I could see that they probably didn't have enough healthy. They probably would have needed to trade Mitchell Robinson because you were saying the reason they were trying to do it probably was because of Mitchell Robinson's health. And outside of Mitchell Robinson, I don't think they had enough pieces to make it. But the New York Knicks are both good and keep making good moves, including like things we don't hear about. So the New York Knicks are third in the West or East, third in the East, have made some good moves recently, are still trying to make good moves. And this is different, right? Like I said, like Dean Oliver making bad box score metrics, used to it. Lakers, and ironically enough, now the Warriors for about a decade, right? Brian winning no matter what, used to it. Teams tanking to sell to other markets, used to it. Knicks being good, not used to it, Brian. Not used to it in the Dolan era.
And in fact, I forgot to point out the even more puzzling part of Dean Oliver's new metric is that he's got Josh Hart all the way down at 23rd, even below Ty Jerome, who we pumped up in the last show. Ty Jerome's awesome. In fact, had an incredible game this week and is having a great season. But come on, Josh Hart is like a top 10, top 5 player this year. He should be like defensive MVP. He's playing great on offense. Like Josh Hart is so good. Yeah, the Knicks are. It's all about health for them. Is Robinson going to be able to stay healthy? Towns is looking okay. Yeah, I mean, they are eighth right now in SRS. They are. Let's see, how's their offense doing? Their offense is a little bit farther down, but then yeah, their defense is higher up. So I don't know. The Knicks, I'm concerned about. Like they have really good players, but I feel like they should be winning more. I don't know.
That's the right way to be. I'll take that.
Yeah.
La Last one, Brian. Let's just end with this and I'll actually try and make it quick because we got much more talk on the other subjects, which I love, Brian. We're back. We're back. What I was going to throw to you is revisiting the bag. This was an article idea you kind of did as a throwaway line, but I loved because when I brought up Glenn Robinson last show, and how he held out as a rookie to get a $30 million contract. So trivial now, but back in the day, that was huge. And then managed to retire after getting a $12 million contract with Philadelphia, which bought him out. And then he went to the Spurs and won a title. We called him like a get your bag player, namely get paid, right? Focus on getting paid. And then he also got it on the way out. And I was like, what are other players that were good at that? And what's funny is you were saying to me, oh, are these players that were terrible players and got paid? Because if you look at, say, Andrea Bargnani would be a candidate for that. And I was like, no, it doesn't have to be that. It just has to be players that really were amazing at maximizing their pay in the NBA. So I have a couple names I want to throw to you, Brian. Maybe I'll write an article. Maybe you have a couple. Maybe people in the listening have too, and then we can go from there. I was going to say for sure Glenn Robinson. We brought him up. I was going to bring up Carmelo Anthony, who I've been meaning to write this post for years. I argue Carmelo Anthony is an analytics darling in that it's almost like he read Wages of Wins and Stumbling on Wins and maximized his earning based on that. He won an NCAA title, which Dave says maximizes your draft chance. So he left early to come to the NBA. Conventional wisdom, right, is like get more prepared in college. And Carmelo Anthony's like, no, I'm going to get paid. He scored all the points on a team, which, again, biggest way to get paid is to score points. I argue Melo could have been a better player, but score points, score points, score points. after a second big contract, he hops to a bigger market, New York, right? Does that. So it's like, and if Melo had not been in the same draft class as LeBron James, he would like if all of the metrics, if we looked at all of the metrics of Melo's 2003 draft class, excluding LeBron, who isn't right, Melo would have lapped everybody on the one that matters, pay, right? Melo, when all is said and done, made like quarter of a billion or something, something like that, which is going to seem really weird in the modern NBA. But like, I guarantee you, outside of LeBron James, like, I think everybody else is like 30, 40 million below him.
Yeah, so you know who
So,
I was thinking of was Rashard Lewis. He went to the Magic for like over $100 million, which was a lot at the time. I think the salary cap was a lot more forgiving in those years. But yeah, to me, Rashard Lewis.
yeah. Okay. So, by the way, and one last stat, Melo outs like Dwayne Wade, Finals MVP, multiple titles, right? 198 million. Carmelo Anthony, 266 million. Rashard Lewis, I absolutely love because yeah, he played really well in the playoffs for the Magic like once, and then they mad overpaid him, right? That's a great name. One I have is actually Patrick Ewing. His agent argued that he
Mm.
had to be like making the aggregate of the top three centers in the league. And so I've looked this up before. If you look at percentage of salary cap, no one in NBA history comes close to Patrick Ewing. Patrick Ewing in the modern NBA, where we actually have all the salary data, is the best paid player of all time. So he's a good one. Got to give it to Kobe Bryant, right? Kobe Bryant didn't leave any money. Like he didn't Dirk Nowitzki it. He got old. He's like, pay me my money. $50 million contract to end his career. He's a fantastic one. There've got to be a couple others. But yeah, I would say Glenn Robinson, Carmelo Anthony, Kobe Bryant, Patrick Ewing, are easily my four. Rashard Lewis is an interesting one. I'm trying to think if there's
All these
anybody
guys
else,
are the
but those
same
four.
era. It's really interesting. It's
Yeah, it's
almost
hard to
like that
go.
era led to this current, more punitive salary cap era.
Well, I've written that article too. Like every
Yeah.
time players kind of like
Yep.
abuse, every time a player does a Victor Wembanyama and abuses the rules, the rules come back more stringent, which is why you don't have rookies getting contracts like Glenn Robinson, which is why you don't have sent like superstars getting contracts like Patrick Ewing. Them doing it busted the way. Kevin Garnett would be an interesting one too, right? His
Mm.
contract with the T-Wolves, which arguably did that as well. I might have to look at that, like the get your bag players. If they changed a rule because of how you got your bag, you may have to like be an automatic in.
Oh,
So
I just mean in
it's
terms
like
of
the
like comparing the different CBAs, right? Like there must
yes,
have been something about that CBA that really, let the players do it.
absolutely. All right, Brian. Anybody else besides Rashard Lewis before I lead us out?
That's the only one off the top of my head. Yeah.
That was a good pull, though. I mean, it's like, it's when we're talking about like efficiency, it's like I'm given volume, you're given efficiency. Correct metrics, Brian. Go for efficiency. All right. Thanks so much for coming back to the Box for Geek show. I'm glad we're keeping this regular, Brian. I don't know if this season is, every week is getting more and more crazy. I didn't think we were going to be able to top the trade. We didn't think we were going to be able to talk Luka Doncic. We got Butler. Not great storylines. Got players like Victor Wembanyama getting injured. Got everything, Brian. So this season is despite me saying so much stuff is repeating, this season is so freaking wild. So we'll see what happens in 2 weeks. You can find myself and Brian Foster. I'm on Blue Sky as Nerd Numbers. Brian Foster is B Foster. I don't know if you're findable, but I did see you like some of my stuff today, Brian. So I approve of
Yeah.
that. Of course, with the Boxscore Geeks show, the numbers at boxscoregeeks.com. If you're feeling fun, you can catch the live show, twitch.tv/nerd numbers. You'll see when we go live because that's where we record this. And then, of course, you can catch the unedited show, youtube.com/at nerd numbers, and then go any place podcasts are found, the Boxscore Geek show to hear the edited version where I think I'm going to leave most of the tea spilling in. In past, I've been like, I'll cut some stuff, be nicer, but this is fun stuff, Brian. I think I'll just cut the ums. So anyway, we'll see you next time. Thanks everybody for listening.